this Module 2 of the Introduction to Testing from Value Transformation LLC. The requirements are where we start to really get into the meat of test planning. This study from the Standish Group may be dated. However, experience suggests these issues are pretty much the same today. Missing requirements or undocumented requirements are comparable, especially when it comes to testing. Articulation of the feature content of the product and expected performance becomes word of mouth at best. The requirements are the textual expectations placed upon the product development and testing personnel. In this module, we will discuss the requirements a bit more at length. We will discuss requirements because for testing for compliance to requirements, we will need to discover the task dependencies and then generate the test requirements. We will discuss what requirements are and how we document these for both the development of the product as well as providing fodder for the testing. We will also discuss the use of reviews and inspections, often referred to as static testing. These provide a point for finding and resolving documentation issues, the cheapest place to solve the problem. Into every project, change will fall, and managing this change is important for successful product development and effective testing. Ultimately, our testing to requirements will confirm or refute that we have delivered and met the desired requirement. In essence, we are testing an hypothesis. This is a function of project closure. Requirements describe the product we want to deliver only when they are reasonably complete. Sometimes the customer is learning about their own product. The requirements should be connected to the business case for the product, and they describe the expected content and performance of the product from multiple perspectives. There can be performance requirements, feature requirements, and requirements on hardware and software. In some cases, the customer may ask the supplier to develop the requirement specification and submit it for approval. This approach can be a blessing or a curse. Blessing, when we have enough information to build a complete spec. Curse, when we are wandering in a wasteland of assumptions and half concepts. No matter the language or proficiency, we will have challenges in clearly articulating and recording requirements. Erroneous and unchecked requirements will lead to erroneous results. That is, a product that does not perform as desired, but as defined. Additionally, requirements can collide with each other if they are competing requirements. All issues should be clarified with the customer before proceeding. There are many types of requirement, but these can be split into two categories. The requirements we wish to articulate regarding the product or service, and those that are productive and workable, and those that are erroneous. We provide some example of erroneous requirements. We want to uncover the requirements that are workable and help us reach the goal and eliminate those that are superfluous and cloud the work, or worse still, take the team off in the wrong direction. These are attributes of good requirements. Each requirement should be measured against these criteria, as this will help refine the expectations upon the end product. Make it easier for the development personnel to understand, and equally important, easier for the test personnel to test. A good requirement is traceable to the business case or needs of the organization and customer. They may be technical prerequisites for the business case or due to some legal implication on the product. We gather the requirements in many ways. For business cases, the customer generates the requirement. For regulatory or standard compliance, government agencies or standards bodies drive the requirements. We can learn from our competitors via teardowns, and that can be a source of our requirements. If our product is particularly complicated or a collection of systems, we may choose to approach the task by starting at the top level, defining the system and decomposing the specific subsystem interactions required to deliver that system. We decompose the highest system functions, and this decomposition leads us to the requirements of the subsystem and components within that subsystem. We can diagram this breakdown using the Functional Analysis Systems Technique, or FAST, an industry standard for value engineering. The requirements can come from anywhere. For example, an observation or scrap of information that makes it possible to define the product. We can use customer inquiry and reviews to generate the requirements. This method often requires some sort of mock-up or simulation, but it can generate productive information about the product. Walkthroughs are scripts of the expected sequence of actions that define the product. This walkthrough examines the features and way the product works to promote the constructive criticism of the product from product stakeholders. During these events, we elicit other requirements that were previously unknown. We filter the incoming information and perspectives, and we document what we deem to be appropriate requirements and eliminate the clutter and non-requirements. Normally, we run changes by the stakeholders, especially the customer. The documented requirements are reviewed or critiqued. Can this requirement be proven or disproven? In other words, each requirement is effectively an hypothesis suitable for testing, but not necessarily formal testing during these early phases. A document tree is one tool we can use to both manage our documents and indicate the hierarchy of documents. In software, counterintuitively, larger modules tend to have fewer errors per line of code than smaller modules. Furthermore, an excessive number of modules can lead to boundary issues as well as an increase in complexity. The same problem applies to hardware. Consider the calculation for serial failure modes. This is the probability of each failure mode times the probability of the next failure mode. As we increase components, we significantly decrease the reliability of the product. This calculation is equivalent to 6 sigma rolling throughput yield. We avoid formal requirements definition languages such as Z, the software requirements language. Although such approaches may reduce ambiguity and redundancy, they also are no better than the effort put into them in the first place. In addition, such formal language requires substantial training to yield even a slight improvement. As we learn from the development, we will likely get more requirements or clarification on previous requirements. We must manage these changes. We will discuss that in a subsequent module on configuration management, the overarching approach to managing change. Essentially, we control the changes to the requirements to allow prediction of certain fundamental variables. For example, ad hoc acceptance of changes can have an unknown effect on the project duration and hence affect delivery. The same is true for cost. One-to-one correspondence to the customer specification is a minimal directive. Customer needs should be elicited throughout the development process to reduce any nebulous ambiguities as well as to reduce the potential for unnecessary redundant code. Derived requirements should indicate the source from which they came. Compliance testing comes from testing specifically and exhaustively, to the extent possible, to requirements. It is the baseline for all subsequent testing, but by no means is compliance testing ever enough testing. Customer reliability requirements are extremely difficult and costly when we test for reliability. The reliability formulae have inbuilt assumptions that can significantly affect the result. For example, the exponent in the Arrhenius equation. The supplier should consider alternative approaches such as highly accelerated life testing to elicit failures, rather than rely on potentially specious predictions of life. Like most of the quality tools, quality function deployment, QFD, is only as good as the effort put into it. Additionally, custom software that supports QFD is typically expensive. A QFD should arise from a team effort, because cross-pollination is critical during this phase of the development. A traceability matrix ensures that we at least meet the customer requirements. This approach can also be used to highlight derived requirements that may not make any sense as the development progresses. As always, the customer should remain in the communications loop. We will have test cases mapped to each of the requirements to refute or confirm that the objective or requirement has been satisfactorily met. There may be a collection of test cases that make up the test procedure for this assessment for systems level requirements or complicated requirements. At this stage, we may automate as much of our testing as is feasible, since automation requires objective measurement of results in order for the machine to accept or reject the performance of the product. Although the government canceled MIL Standard 498, it remains a rational and potent approach to software development. We do not consider the documentation requirements to be excessive. Also, the 498 documents are more consistent in format than are those of the IEEE approach, although either approach works. The government and some companies consider the non-grammatical use, the word shall, to somehow carry more weight than the more appropriate word must. An apparent requirement that follows the word may is not a requirement, but rather a wish. To do are exactly that, items to do. Making them available to the developed team allows for reviews of these items for priority. The customer will sometimes specify the standards they wish the supplier to use for certain verifications. The supplier may also have their own standards. We have always recommended that supplier standards be a superset of standards body requirements. The supplier will then know they meet or exceed the customer requirements. The supplier must balance rigor of testing versus cost. This table is self-explanatory. However, terms should be well defined and understood by all stakeholders. We provide training on how to create the appropriate test plans. We do not conduct the tests. Contact Value Transformation for assistance in your testing needs.